Welcome to the Smart Fix podcast, where smart guys fix more than just problems.
We're your hosts, Alex and Chance. We're building something bigger than a business. We're building a better way to grow, lead, and break through the plateaus that hold service businesses back.
This isn't theory, it's a front row seat to our journey, the late nights, the learning curves, and the wins worth chasing.
If you're tired of feeling stuck and ready to outsmart the grind, you're in the right place.
This is the Smart Fix podcast. Let's get to work.
Alex, you have a quote for us today?
I sure do. This is a quote that they, during the acquisition.com workshop in Vegas with Alex Hermosi and his team, that they said over and over and over again. And that quote was, great CEOs build great businesses by allocating more resources to solving the constraint over and over and over again. And they have a second quote here, which is, businesses grow up to their constraint, then no further.
That makes sense. And I feel like that just relates perfectly, because the second I overcome a constraint, I feel like I almost look for the next one. Like, okay, what is my next one? Or I grow to the point to where now I have another one that I didn't even realize was going to be there. And I know you're familiar with this, of course. What would you say from you looking in?
Mm-hmm.
I am kind of curious on that. What do you think was like the Smart Fix's first constraint? And then I'm going to tell you what I think the Smart Fix's first constraint is, and we can kind of play off of that.
Well, first, for anybody who's listening, before we dive into this, what a constraint is it's just the thing that's stopping you from moving forward. So like if you have a conveyor belt or like a manufacturing plant, and you can manufacture 10 heads, 5 bodies, and you can assemble 10 heads and 10 bodies at one time. Well, you are growing and producing bodies or figurines at the pace that you are able to produce the bodies. Because you can produce the 10 heads, but you can only produce 5 bodies. And then you can only assemble 5 bodies because you have 10 heads, but only 5 bodies. And you need a body to put together a head. So when we talk about constraint, we're talking about that in its simplest form is, what is that stage in your manufacturing plant that is the bodies, where you can only build 5, where everything else you're putting out 10.
Yep.
So coming back to the Smart Fix and our earliest constraints, it was a while
I would
ago.
say earliest.
Yeah, earliest. So just like right when we started working together, I would say the first one was probably leads for us, getting
100%.
customers.
I was going to say,
Yeah.
so we're on. Yeah. Because I was ready. I had a helper ready. Like we
Mhm.
were, it was just leads. How do we get leads? What would you say the second constraint? I'm curious if we're kind of on like the same pathway, and if that's how most businesses go, because then there's maybe like a track record of, okay, well, this is the first constraint. Then you have another constraint when it comes to service space. So first, definitely leads, 100%. Well, once we figured out leads, what do you think our next constraint went to?
Oh man. So we got leads, and then we figured that one out fairly quickly. We started getting booked out. But then I think you were the only one working, and you were fully booked out.
Yeah.
And so I think the constraint there was we couldn't do more work. Like it didn't matter if we doubled our lead count. We were not about to double our business because you were just doing everything. And so I think that was the next constraint. I don't think we solved it right away, but I think that was the constraint that we hit.
Yeah, because I even remember, because it was early on. We've done LSA for a while. What was the first lead source that we did? It wasn't Angie.
No, it was back in Victoria. We were just doing organic. We built
Right?
the entire business off of organic, and then a
Organic,
couple of doors you knocked on, and some door hangers that you went.
Oh yeah, I just did a crap ton of door hangers. That's right. There was like a period of months where I did door hangers. And then so the business started coming through, and leads weren't as big of a problem. Now the next constraint was, me fulfilling the amount of work. So then I basically just stopped doing door hangers. We still had organic calls coming in, but it was like, I think there was a point where we were like 4-6 weeks booked out. and this is, I wanted to say that now because it's crazy. Just a fast forward, right? We
Mm-hmm.
were 4 to 6 weeks booked out, charging a much lower premium.
Yeah.
Whereas nowadays, if we're 4 days booked out, I'm like, oh, I don't like that, because I want to charge the higher premium and have like the more quality client for the next couple days, is what we've
Mm-hmm.
kind of realized over the time. So anyways, fast forward now, going kind of back. So yeah, we were to a point to where I was basically booked for 4 to 6 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
just constantly busy. And that's all that I did was work, 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 answer phone, work, 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 answer phone.
Mm-hmm.
So then it was, okay, I need to hire a technician, a helper.
Yeah.
Um, and I think I sat just at me and a helper for a while.
Yeah.
Um,
I think for
and
a
I
good
don't
like
know.
4 or 5 months or so.
Yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe it was just a comfort thing. Maybe it was a market thing. I know that in Victoria, we didn't, at that point, we also weren't paying for a lot of extra leads. So we didn't have like a lot of work coming in. The market was just a
Mm-hmm.
little bit smaller as well. Um, I don't feel like we were able to increase pricing and whatnot. So that constraint, I feel like for a while, there wasn't a whole lot of additional constraints because we just sat there. And
Yeah.
that's where it's like, part of that, what you said was like, or you just get to a point and then you're like, okay, I'm not handling any more constraints because I'm just going to sit here and just chill
Mm-hmm.
here. Now you don't have those constraints.
Yeah.
Then,
Constraints is a purely growth
yeah,
problem. If you're
yeah,
not growing, you don't really have a constraint.
yeah.
You
Because
might have
that
other.
4 to 6 months was easy. I mean, I
Yeah.
liked it. It was just money
Yeah.
straight to my pocket, and that was it. I had
Yeah.
paid a guy a little bit of cash here and there to to get the extra help.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like for that, we didn't have a whole lot of strengths for a while, and then a lot of constraints poured in the second we moved and went to
Mm-hmm.
DFW.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you say is kind of the progression of it? Like, okay, leads was an issue, and then it was me getting a helper, and then I
Mm-hmm.
just sat there for a while, and then where some businesses, they might do this, they might kind of rebrand or restructure or relocate or whatever. We went through those same two things again, right? We went to a new
Mm-hmm.
market. Constraint number one: no leads.
Yeah.
We figured out, is it Angie? Is it LSA? Is it Google
Mm-hmm.
Organic? Is it, what is it? We then solved that problem. I feel like we solved it a lot quicker that time
Mm-hmm.
because
Yeah.
we already did it before. Then we did it when we moved. We're like, well, now we know what to do. So
Mm-hmm.
we got to drill in on organic, but let's also tap into this, and then let's also tap into this. And we also weren't as afraid, I think, to spend the money because I was at the point where it was like, okay, we need to invest in this in order for it to grow.
Yeah.
Um, and that's what we did. So then the next constraint obviously becomes help again. Now I'm doing
Mm-hmm.
all the work myself. And I think for that point, it went very quick as to, I had one guy and then I was like, I need two, I need three. And I feel
Mm-hmm.
like I went from myself to four really fast,
Mm-hmm.
because the leads weren't the issue.
Yeah.
Then, so, okay. So constraint number one, leads. Constraint number two, help. So now we've kind of made it halfway through our journey. Right now we're to the point of, we got about 4 technicians. Where do you see the next constraint coming in? I know where the next one is. I'm curious your thoughts on next constraint.
Yeah. I think next one. So uh, it's super easy to manage yourself, relatively easy to manage yourself, like when you're doing everything. Um, a little less easy to manage, like you plus one other guy. And it just gets, increasingly less viable to just like self manage everything from there on without the right systems in place for like planning, organizing, collecting payments. Like there's just so much additional stuff that goes into jobs when you're at scale. And so I think that was our next one, is knowing our data and having a system to keep us organized in scheduling those 4 technicians plus yourself,
Mm-hmm.
making sure everybody stays booked up and busy so we keep everybody happy, and then also just making sure that we are making money on jobs. And so for us, we solved that through a CRM. Do you think
Yeah.
that's about right?
Yeah. I was gonna say, because we did that next constraint, which is what you're talking about, management.
Mm-hmm.
We solved it a couple different ways, and you briefed over one of them, because before we went to the bigger CRM, Service Titan, essentially, um, I also at like the same exact time had promoted Henry to lead handyman.
Mm-hmm.
So then that helped as well. But I realized, so we're a little bit off there, but really, really close, because right before we went to that software is when I had hired Henry to do the lead handyman. And then I was like,
Mhm.
this should solve my problem. And then it didn't. It presented new problems, which
Uh-huh.
was he didn't know what was going on with jobs.
Yeah.
And that's where then it was like, okay, now here's our next constraint, which was basically the team not knowing what was going on and more proper management. So I feel like that should have been constraint number 3, which was the CRM, but I jumped the gun, which is fine. We had the talent, and we talked about that in the last podcast of he was ready. He wanted growth. We wanted to invest into him, and we did, and we're
Mhm.
very thankful for it. But I had no way of giving him the communication platform to be successful as a manager.
Mhm.
So him and I were both now like, okay, running around with chickens and our, heads cut off, and 2 managers just over 4 guys. Like, do you even need 2 managers for 4 guys?
Yeah.
Um, so with all of that being said, we then invested into Service Titan. That got all of our I want to say like data, projects, scheduling, everything in one system,
Mhm.
made it a whole lot cleaner. Now
Yeah.
it's like, okay, now we're getting somewhere. Now this makes sense. Um, this is going good, right? Um, the constraint after that was, so now we're ready to kind of ramp it up. We go from 4 guys to 8, right? So
Mhm.
we're like, okay, let's go from 4 technicians to 8. And I'm thinking, okay, well, that's why we kind of pre-hired Henry, right? Because I can handle 4, he can handle 4, and that's good.
Mhm.
Next constraint came at 8, which was, okay, now we've got so many leads coming in. I don't have the time to answer the phones for all of these leads. And that's when we talked about hiring a CSR.
Mhm.
So then we hired Haley, my wife, and she came in as the CSR and started helping in on that end. And I think that's how we solved that constraint. That was a pretty, for the most part, I feel like one of the simplest constraints to solve for
Mhm.
me specifically, because it was like, hey, you need a job and you're really good at this and you know everything about my company. So this is perfect. It took no training. It took nothing. So if you're out there and you're listening to this part, like, it's going to be harder for you if you don't have someone who knows exactly what's going on. For me, it was quite simple. It was, babe, can you answer the phones for the next couple of weeks? Let's see how that goes. And then if it goes good, we'll continue to move forward. And luckily it went good.
Mhm.
So we solved the management. We solved the phone call overflow coming through. Um, and I think now we're kind of at our next constraint, which is, do you see any other constraints in that timeline before I kind of proceed with where we're at now?
I think we re-entered a couple constraints. Like a constraint, once you an important note here, once you solve a constraint, that doesn't mean it's forever solved. It just means you
Yeah.
solved it for that level. But like, at the very beginning, we solved getting leads. Awesome. We solved
Yep.
getting leads for $10,000 to $50,000 in monthly revenue.
Mm-hmm.
Doing solving leads for doing $100,000, $200,000 in revenue per month is very different than solving it at the $10,000 level. And
Good point.
so, same thing with hiring. You have to, your very first hire is going to be very different from your 30th hire. And so, I think after the CSR and the project management software, we re-entered, I believe, the leads and the hiring constraints again, and then we've kind of been like floating around there.
Yeah, and it's because it's a new constraint. It's now, okay, well,
Mm-hmm.
I knew how to handle this to bring in, like you said, 10 to 50,000 in revenue, but how do we do it for this one?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the same thing goes for, okay, well, I knew how to hire 4 to 8 technicians, but how do I hire 12 to 16
Yeah.
and keep them, right? I
Mm-hmm.
can hire,
Yeah.
like I told you earlier today, I'm like, I can hire 16 guys today. For sure. We
But they'll
have
be
plenty of
gone in a week.
applicants, but they'll be gone next week because
Yeah.
none of them will work out properly. Which is what we kind of covered, and we'll go more into depth on hiring and stuff in the futures, because I feel like that's such an integral part.
Yeah.
But that is our biggest constraint right now. Is what would you say is more of the constraint? And I think I already know, leads or the team. That's the team.
Hiring the team.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. That definitely the team.
yeah. And it's just because I feel like it's, and I'm curious to if you're in a different industry than handyman, like if you have this same problem, but I feel like for handyman, it's more difficult, in my opinion. Or maybe you have a handyman company and you don't find it that difficult, but I feel like it's more difficult just because of the industry. Like these are guys that are typically just, they're a little more, rough around the edges, kind of
Hmm.
just get in, get out, and once I make my money, then I'm gone, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so finding like the professional people out of that, the ones that can represent our company the best, like that's hard. Like earlier I was telling you, it's about a 1 to 30. Like out of every 30 to 40 applicants, I get somebody that I like. Not even I get
Hmm.
somebody that I hire, but like I get somebody that I finally like. And
Yeah.
then they do an on-site interview. And then we go forward. And luckily that number has stayed about consistent to where I could say it's probably 1 to 50 of like applicants to hire, but it's like 1 to 30 for just finding somebody I even want to consider for the position.
Hmm.
And that's difficult, right? That means I have to, that's where the next constraint comes in that you and I have been talking about. It's like talking to 30 people. And let's just say you have a 3-minute conversation with 30 people. So it takes an hour and a half for me to find somebody that I like. Well, that's not actually a terrible amount of time. So as long as I take an hour and a half out of every, that's hilarious. Earlier we talked about I could time block from 4:30 to 6 o'clock. So if I
Hmm.
spent that hour and a half in having those 3-minute conversations every day, essentially I could find someone I liked every single day.
Hmm.
And that means by the end of the week, I've got 5 people. And that's how we've figured out we can solve that constraint as I'm talking it through right now. So,
Yeah. And
just a
I
really
think
good
that's
example of constraint, figuring it out and how to work it through. This is a perfect example because we didn't know about these numbers until we
hmm
started talking about them on the
yeah.
call.
And I think this is big for business owners out there because it's so easy to kind of like get trapped in the state of mind of like, I don't have enough time to do this. Of
Yeah.
like, I have to call 30 people. Like, that's going to be, so much time. And like, yeah, a lot of times, like solving these challenges and doing these tasks, they're almost never easy and
Hmm.
they become increasingly more and more difficult and time consuming as you continue to scale. And right, but I find that almost never, at least the most common ones that I've faced in my journey, they've never been as bad or hard to or as time consuming to overcome as I thought.
Than
Like,
what you anticipated.
exactly. I'm like,
Yeah.
ah, God, I have to,
Yeah.
fix this problem within the company. Like, that's going to take me forever. And then I just dedicate an entire day to solving that. And by the end of the day, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I think I'm on to something really good here.
This is a
It,
little off track,
uh-huh.
but just because of what you just said, I forgot who said it, but they actually recommended for business owners starting their day challenging the most difficult problem because
Eat
then
the
you're going,
frog.
yes, yeah,
Eat
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
frog. Yep.
I love that.
Hmm.
It's hilarious because I've got so much stress. I also do therapy and stuff. They say the opposite. They're like, start your day with something you love and this and that and blah, blah, blah. And mind you, that's great. And I do that. So
Hmm.
I start my day with getting a glass of tea and I go outside and I sit on the porch and I've taken both of those and then said, okay, at the same time, I'm about to do the hardest thing of today, and that is
Hmm.
call this client
Yeah.
or call this technician or whatever. And then once that's done, I'm like, oh, everything else is easy. This
Yeah.
is a breeze. And when I
But if you
used to
wait,
do, yeah,
yeah, but
what
if
I
you wait
used to
until
do
the
was
end of the
wait
day, uh-huh. But then you're thinking about it all day.
all
You're
day.
work like, "God, I don't want to call that person. I don't want to call
It's
that person."
just consuming your thoughts. So now
Uh-huh.
I love doing that. I think that's a great practice. Um, I think that almost even falls into kind of constraints. It's a daily, like, okay, this is what's holding me up for today. Don't
Hmm.
let it. Just
Yeah.
knock that crap out and move on.
Yeah.
Because once you do, it's even like an adrenaline rush. Like, ha, I did it.
Yeah. You get hit with that dopamine. Feel
Hmm.
good. I always kind of think of time in like the aspect of a business owner in like 4 quadrants. Um, as a business owner, you know you only have so much time. And going back to the quote from the very when we started this podcast of a great CEO is there to allocate resources. That can be their resources, it can be company resources. But
Yeah.
when you're smaller, it's mostly just your resources. And when I say your resources, it's mostly your time because you don't
Yeah.
have much money at that stage.
Yeah.
And so when thinking about at that early stage, your most valuable resource of time, there are kind of 4 quadrants that your time can fall into. If you're looking to scale your business, you can either be focusing on, let's say, the right thing, but you're focusing on it the wrong way. You
Mm.
can be focusing on the wrong problem or the wrong thing the wrong way. You could be focusing on the wrong problem the right way, or you can be focusing on the right problem the right way. And what we had just been talking about is pushing off the hardest thing to do, and always it's like thinking like this is gonna be so difficult, and it's just gonna be so painful, and I just don't want to do it, but like I know I have to do it. Then you just like push it off, and then it's Friday, and you're like, okay, I'll just do this Monday, and then Monday comes along, and then you forget about it, and now it's Thursday, and you do that again. That's an example of solving the right problem. You know what to do, but you're solving it the wrong way. You are
The wrong
spending
way.
your time on the stuff that is not going to build your business. And this is a very hard kind of unlock and hurdle for business owners to get over. I know for myself, it was a really big one. And that's because you fill your time with stuff, but as you scale, you have new things and more things that you have to focus on. But to focus on those new things, you have to stop doing other things,
Mm-hmm.
which means you either have to cut stuff off or you have to delegate things. And
You
that's
know
very
what's,
hard for
I
business
was going to
owners
say,
to
you
do.
know what? The hardest part about that is just the acceptance of somebody else can do it. Like
Mm,
when I delegate something, I have to accept that that person can most likely do it on their own. For me, it's a struggle for me to like fully accept that they can do it because in my mind I'm like, no, that's difficult and I've always done that. And that's a delicate thing for them to handle. I don't know if they're able to do it. And it's your business, it's your baby. Like
hmm
it's all you care about.
Yeah.
I mean, it was hard for me to do that and that's my wife. Like I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, is she going to do it right? You know? So God forbid it be now we've got Sandra, the other CSR,
hmm
and that's even harder is like,
Yeah.
I mean, it is not my job by any means to go through and like review her calls all day. We have systems in place to where she can review her own calls. Haley can review her calls, but I still do it 3 times a day
hmm
because I'm like, can't let that go yet. Can't let that go yet. Can't let that go yet. I don't need to. Her numbers stay consistent now that everything has kind of changed, and it's not something I have to spend an hour doing a day. Should I check in on it? Yeah, for sure. That's definitely I should check in on it. But
hmm
that is not part of my job. There is people in place to do that job.
Yeah.
Haley does it every day, and there's no reason for me to do it. And I like what you also said about the pushing things off. And I think the most recent thing that's going to pay off big time that we just never wanted to do was the truck wrap. Right, like
Yeah.
we've been talking about this for months and months and months. It's like it's going to take so much time to design. It's going to cost X amount of money to do, and it's like I just don't want to do it now. And Haley got it all done in like 4 days, and now
hmm
the truck wrap's going to be done, and it really doesn't even cost that much in the grand scheme of marketing. And we're probably going to go make all of that back within like a week. Just
Yeah.
go sit out in front of Lowe's and try to get people with a truck wrap.
Yeah.
So like, just handle that problem. But that is a perfect example of us putting that thing off, and then also just like it is hard to delegate stuff as a business
hmm
owner because
Yeah.
it is your baby. Like don't
So,
take that lightly because I know it's difficult.
yeah. And it sounds like we're going to be going into delegation further in a future podcast because
100%.
I have a lot of thoughts on this.
Yeah, there's delegation alone, I think is the biggest key almost to handling God, I can't believe I forgot the word. constraints. It is that also as a business owner, you have 3 million things on your mind, and something else just popped into my mind. But yeah, literally, like that delegating is the biggest key to, I think, handling those constraints, overcoming the constraints.
Yeah.
It's one of them, right? It's not all of it, but it is a big one for scale. When you get to scale, a lot of that comes down to, can you delegate properly?